Diolch yn fawr iawn am y profiad i dod yma heddiw. Thanks very much, Derek, and I don't think you've heard very much Welsh today, so I just wanted to thank everybody for the invitation to join you here today. And I stand before you as somebody who sent PowerPoint slides in and they don't work. So you are not going to get the PowerPoint, so you're just going to get me without it. So there'll be a test at the end, as an ex-teacher of English and drama, full solid humanities base, to see whether or not I've managed to translate what I'm going to say without the slides. That would have been a very nice help. But I'm going to give you the title that I gave to this, which is, What if you had a bridge from the present to the future you want, and there was a law to help? Now, I did a workshop I do lots and lots of workshops in universities, in schools, in colleges, because I think in many ways my favorite thing is working with young people. And while I was Education Minister, I introduced ways of bringing young people more into the education system. I ran a youth club for a while. I was a teacher for a while. So I've always been incredibly keen to respond to that question about how do we co-create with young people? And I don't think we're there yet in Wales. I'm not sure if we're there yet anywhere in terms of a country, or indeed anywhere much outside what the Commissioner does and the Academy in terms of organisations. But I just want to kind of start with this idea that future generations are not generations we know nothing about. I like being called an activist grandmother. I was also called an anarchist granny. So, but I think I kind of, having created a law, I don't really think that the anarchist approach works. But the oldest person who I know and love in my life is my mum. She's 95. She's in a care home. She's suffering from dementia. But her body is very much well. No matter how many times she falls over, she leaps to her NHS knees and gets up again. And the youngest person I know and love is my granddaughter, who is 4. Now, just look at a 95-year-old, and going back to what someone said on the last panel, I think it was either Carlos or Gustavo, who talked about the World War II generation. My mum was born during World War II. And so she came with all those ideas and very much welcomed the post-World War most visionary government, I think, is what we often think that we ever had, just post-World War II, when we had a government which introduced the National Health Service, an Education Act, housing for everyone. You know, the kind of policies that were very much about responding to a massive global disaster and were voted for overwhelmingly by the British people. Now, my mother grew up with that, and she's 95 years old. Now, if I live as long as her, and my granddaughter lives as long as me, between my granddaughter and my mother, there is a span of 200 years. 7 generations. So we're not talking about some amorphous blob in the future. We're talking about people alive now, people you love now, people you care about and want to live a good life now. And I just think that's a really, really important lens with which to view this debate. Because if we don't view it, we think of future generations as people we have no responsibility to care about. And when politicians are forced always into short-term decisions, how do we ensure that those decisions don't do damage? What I loved from the Kogi representative who spoke to us all earlier is this idea, not that we put a sticking plaster on, going down the line, that we look downstream and we just have a policy to change a policy because it's been ineffective. And then we find 3 ways down the line on that actually the latest policy has no reference to the individual one we wanted to address in the first place. But that you go back to the point at which it was broken. You go back not to the break, but the point before the break when it worked. Now, if we can look upstream in what we do, then we have a real chance of handing on a world to future generations that is as good as the one that those of us who are that baby boomer generation, those of us who have had the most privileged, I would suggest, upbringing of all, because we benefited from those post-war policies. I played at the time that WWF did its first assessment of nature. 100% in terms of nature is actually seen as 1970. And therefore, when I was a child, 1970 was the point at which we now look at 70% reduction in species. But it wasn't 100% in 1970. It will have been 100% way before that. So this shifting baseline is incredibly important in terms of looking at what a good future looks like to us all. Now, I've told the story in my book, and perhaps Derek can hold it up if we don't get the PowerPoint slides while I'm standing on the stage. But why I proposed what became the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is originally in 1999, when the National Assembly for Wales was set up for the first time, we had a duty to promote sustainable development in everything that we did. And it turned out that by 2010, so nearly 10 years later, when we've been trying really hard, we'd made it the central organising principle of government, we had lots of really, really good policies, but they were not guiding everything that we did. Because it turned out the duty to promote meant absolutely nothing. So being a minister who never liked anybody saying no to me, which is why I'm the first bag lady in the UK. I introduced the first carrier bag charge in the UK, and within 5 years, the rest of the UK followed. I introduced the first recycling legislation to ensure that by 2050, we're at zero waste. I'm hoping, and I'm sorry if either of the other countries are in the room, but I'm hoping we will be first in the world next year. We are second in the world at the moment, little old Wales. And that is about taking a long-term view of delivery. So legislation or regulations that I introduced in 2009 are now having an impact where Wales is succeeding because slow and steady has been the approach, and taking people with you all the way. Now, people, when we started that, thought recycling was a good thing, and therefore they were prepared to sign up to it. There have been moments when they didn't like it anymore because they thought their recycling was landing on other people's shores as rubbish. We had to be really good to make sure we could deal with those sorts of issues. But that is about talking to people, engaging with people, and taking them with you. So when I had the responsibility for delivering on sustainability and found that the duty to promote meant nothing, I was determined to introduce a duty to deliver. And so what the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act now incorporates, which is from our learning in that first decade, it incorporates 7 goals linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's really important because a country like Wales, which is not even a member state, must sign up to something which has global recognition. So previously we'd supported the Millennium Development Goals, then we supported the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals. Derek mentioned earlier that there was a massive exercise in 2014, supported by the UN, when it was doing the World We Want discussion, into the Wales We Want, and not carried out by Welsh government, but carried out by the non-profits, the voluntary sector, those people who work closely with others. And the very words of people that came back in 2014 fed into the actual language of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, where both what the goals mean is on the face of the Act, and very importantly, 5 ways of working are on the face of the Act. 5 ways of working, which actually we've been hearing from virtually every speaker in the room today. We have to think long term. We have to think preventatively. We have to collaborate, co-create. We have to integrate outcomes. And my absolute favourite one, which I think governments do very badly at all levels, we have to involve people about whom decisions are being made. And I think that point about involvement, that if I'm going to ask Bridges to do anything, I'm going to say, pick up those 5 ways of working and make them real in a way that actually we can be confident that instead of governments doing things to people, they do things for people, with people. And the with is incredibly important here. What you won't see in the 7 goals is the word growth, but we do talk about prosperity. And it's not prosperity that is at expense of the planet. It's prosperity within planetary boundaries. And it was actually one of the voluntary organisations that commissioned a barrister to write the advice that then meant that those words in terms of planetary boundaries were included in the Act. And because it's a law, the government and all its public services in Wales can be held to account. The Future Generations Commissioner, see here Mark II, because the Future Generations Commissioner has 1 7-year term. So he will always straddle 2 governments of whatever political inclination. And because it's a law, of course, every government of every political inclination has this law that now guides its operating principles. The Auditor General for Wales. Now, the Auditor General is very important because the Auditor General for Wales audits all the public services. So if you want to make sure that the audit system has to change, then you make sure that the person who audits everybody, including Welsh Government. So we're now not only seeing changes in the audit system, but a very solid partnership with the Future Generations Commissioner's Office in terms of who does what in the way this is held to account. And the really important thing for me, as this is the bit, I suppose, that I contributed towards the Act, was this is from our learning as 10 years as a Cabinet Minister. I appointed the first Sustainable Futures Commissioner as a test, and it worked so well that we were able then to put this into law. Working with the Auditor General at the time, understanding that the Auditor General could then redefine what value for money looks like. And really importantly, the Auditor General and the Future Generations Commissioner can hold the Welsh Government to account. The Welsh Government is not above this Act. The Welsh Government is accountable to the same mechanisms, including the courts through judicial review. Now, it's mentioned that I could give you plenty of examples from the Welsh Government activity in terms of how this Act has changed what they've done. Banning smacking, for example, putting a universal basic income pilot in place for care leavers, the most disadvantaged group in society, or 20 miles an hour in all residential areas in Wales. But I just want to say a little bit before I close, because we want the opportunity to ask questions in this session, is about Wales Net Zero 2035. And this directly relates to what Gustavo was saying about the fact that we cannot do these things without looking at the effects on the poorest communities. So Wales Net Zero 2035, it's easily readable reports on the website of that name. was about both academic underpinning, because it's really important you have evidence for the work that you're doing, but our commission was to examine potential pathways to zero by 2035, looking at the impact on society and sectors of our economy, including how any adverse effects may be mitigated and the costs and benefits shared fairly. Because we chose, I asked a number of international stellar celebrities in the climate, nature, circular economy and other fields to join me, and not one said no. And they joined me, and we worked on this for 18 months according to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So it had to advance biodiversity. It had to make sure that there was a just transition. And the really important message about it all was the fact that as a minister, we get recommendations all the time. I mean, literally all the time. I remember doing an informal count and finding out in the last 2 weeks before I left government, I think we'd had something like 3,000 recommendations between us as members of the cabinet. Now, you often, if you're not in that environment, you carefully craft the recommendations to ministers without understanding that that is what they're receiving. And I was determined, I will never write a recommendation to a minister. I will write a pathway to action. So what we did with the Wales Net Zero work is actually draw out the pathways. How are we going to achieve net zero in a just and nature positive way in the context of buildings or food or energy or transport, the big four? But also, how are we going to adapt appropriately? How are we going to deal with risks? And where are the areas that are still left undone? So 7 reports from us, 5 reports from the Wales Centre for Public Policy at Cardiff University underpinning our work, and all our reports in detail show what policies need to be in place and by when, if you are going to be ambitious about delivering on net zero in a just and nature positive way by 2035. I'm really proud of the work because I'm not a climate scientist or a nature scientist. I'm passionate about effective change that takes people with us. Wangari Maathai, who's one of my absolute heroes, says, in the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground, a time when we will have to shed our fear and give hope to each other. And that time is now. And I want to go back to an absolutely key Welsh saying, Avo ben byd bont. Avo ben byd bont. If you want to be a leader, be a bridge. Advice from Wales from the 11th century. Diolch yn fawr.
So Jane.
It's taken some time.
Yeah. What do you see around the world? Because you do some of this, I do some of this. Do you see the Welsh example inspiring others and that happening in other countries?
Yes, I mean, some people will know that there was a Summit of the Future in New York last September when the UN General Assembly met. And there's a proposal for an envoy for future generations, which is being taken forward. And I think what's been extraordinary is the UN bodies in particular have been immensely supportive of Wales. And I do want to say thank you to all those who represent UN bodies here for that support in actually showing the way that a small country, very much place-based, can say, actually, we're not going to subscribe to these big global negative narratives. We're going to find a narrative that fits better with our population and our place. And therefore, Derek and I kind of work in harmony, as I used to with the previous Future Generations Commissioner, or you could say I'm the before and he's the after. Because if we hadn't created the Act, there wouldn't be a commissioner. and he has a number of legislative responsibilities. I have none. I've just got this opportunity to go, or rather not go, but talk around the world from my attic in Pembrokeshire about the value of such legislation. There are some 40 countries in the world now that are interested in this legislation. I mean, only today, I've just been told that the government of Norway is interested, and I'm going to be doing an interview with Norwegian television in August. There are many, many other organizations too, because this approach, this positive values-led approach, because I also very much listened to the person this morning who was going, actually values can lead you in totally the wrong direction. So this kind of anti-Trumpian values-led approach can be done at organization level. It can be done at school level. It can be done at local government level. It can be done at city level. It can be done at business level. And there are examples of all of those who do this because they want this sort of narrative about who they are and who they're working with. And I was speaking at a huge conference in Slovenia. Took me 3.5 days to get there by train and the same back, a little earlier this year. And I was absolutely astonished. There were 90 countries in the room, and about 50 of those have come back to me since then, asking for more details of the legislation. So we've got something where I think that Wales did something really special in starting this debate, but I am not going to suggest that this job is finished. This job has only just begun, because this is a countercultural approach to governance. And if we don't deliver effectively together on what involvement looks like, what collaboration and co-creation looks like, what long-term looks like, what prevention looks like, what integrating outcomes looks like, there is a danger it will be used to justify action which doesn't meet the needs that we're all recognizing today.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane. Brilliant. Yeah, I think what you exemplify and what I think we've all tried to do is to be proud in our approach, but very humble about the fact that we've got a long way to go in terms of progress. All right, questions for Jane, please. Yes, you saw your hand first. I don't know if there's another mic. We can share a mic. Oh, there's another mic coming to you. Thank you. Oh, there were 6, another dwindling. Yes, please, go ahead.
Hello. So first, thank you for today. It's been an absolute treat with all the speakers I've listened to. It just feels such a privilege as well to have you two there and I feel so proud about this incredible piece of legislation. And my question is, how can we be even more brave as a country and make even more radical decisions? I'm looking at a country like Costa Rica, where you talk far less about what they've done, but they've been so radical and brave in their legislation. And what can we learn from them, and how can we be even more like them, I suppose?
Great question. And can you introduce yourself? Sorry.
Yes, my name is Karin Decon, and until very recently I was working with Judith Muscastone on the Creative Nature Partnership with Arts Council of Wales.
Great. Let's just take one more. I think Dan's got a question right next to you. Dan.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dan Wood. I work for Natural Resources Wales as an ecologist. I'm also on the Future Gens Academy. My question is that obviously the Act is brilliant, but it's only compulsory for public bodies to do the Act currently. And working for NRW, we do a lot of contract work that goes to private companies, and we have big private companies obviously that operate in Wales that may have a negative effect or maybe don't care as much about the obligations of the Future Generations Act. So I suppose that's from the previous question, how can we be more radical and perhaps target private organisations as well as the public ones that are already compulsory?
I should just explain to people who don't know, NRW is Natural Resources Wales, which is our environmental body, government environmental body. Jane.
I think, and I do apologise if I don't cover everything, I wear hearing aids. COVID And the boom back means that I'm struggling a bit. So I'm going to ask Derek to repeat the core parts of questions. But my understanding is you were asking about being braver, and Dan was asking about the private sector.
Yeah.
Okay. Being braver, as somebody who's been a politician, I think Derek was probably right when he said, I never worried about what people thought of me. And that is quite helpful. But it's also not how everybody behaves. And politicians, you will often find, are not as brave as the communities they serve. But they don't understand the communities they serve want them to be braver. And I think that is the contract we have as the public, really, I think, with politicians. I think we have to ensure that politicians understand how brave we are prepared to be in this sort of space. We are a massive climate majority compared to those people who are not. And yet we would not know that, certainly in terms of the media or anything like that in this country. We would never know that we are in the climate majority, that most people do care about climate change and understand that it's going to have an impact. So my kind of main thing about the Act is, at the moment, is to say to people, once you know about it, look it up, and then effectively go and slap it down in front of any of your elected representatives, because everyone at all levels in Wales is accountable to the Act. So it doesn't matter whether it's a parish, community or town council, whether it's local government, whether it's somebody who works for a health board, whether it's people on economy, whether it's the regulator on environment. They are all accountable to the Act. So demand more of them. That's my answer on that one. And in terms of Dan's one, I think that the two things. One is that I think that the Academy needs to double in size, Derek. Because the Academy, which is all people from all those organisations, there needs to be more of them going into more management positions sooner to actually change the culture of organisations, which when you started the Academy, were still having people at the top who were used to the old ways of working. You can't change business as usual overnight. You need to have people with the new skills coming in, driving change, and putting that act down in front of others and saying, you're not behaving properly. But the point in terms of the private sector is, there is a massive opportunity, which actually in many ways has been assisted by Brexit. I think it's the only opportunity assisted by Brexit, which between the private sector and the public sector in Wales in terms of procurement. And if all the public sector was much more imaginative about procurement at every level and did as much as locally as possible, you could really involve local businesses. They could deliver to the Act, they could be given their own One Planet standard, and they would have to demonstrate that before they could procure into any of those organisations which had that obligation. It's all there for you. It just needs to be driven.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got ambitious goals set out in the legislation, as you know, Dan, and if, it only applies to the public sector because devolution only allowed the legislation to apply to the public sector. But we need the private sector, we need the community sector on board to deliver on our ambitions. And increasingly you do see that, but it's sometimes slow progress. Right, one more question for Jane. Any more questions? Yes, well, we've got two there. Two quickly, right next to each other. Yeah, Mark.
That's a message to me, isn't it? Quickly.
Hi, Jane. Yeah, so I'm Mark John from Tramshed. We're a innovation hub network. So I'm speaking about quite a fast-moving, agile organisation which has to look at tomorrow and the day after. You mentioned something really interesting about the idea of shifting baselines. Given where we are now and the different sort of things that have happened in the past just 3 months in the world's sort of geopolitical situation, where should our baseline be? You know, looking at how we slipping too far behind, do we need to readjust that, or should we go back to where this process started?
Great question. Jivon, do you want to ask a quick question? Yes?
Oh, thank you, Mark. So thank you for sharing that, Jane. So I'm Jeevan from the Future Generations leadership program. And I was just wondering, what occurs to me like throughout your career is like keeping up that energy, like to keep yourself in a point where you're able to work sustainably on all of these things. And I just wanted to ask like what you find to be energizing to kind of keep up with all of this work and to also have that sense of balance, if you would like to share. That's more of a more general question, but just curious.
question.
That's brilliant. Your question about shifting baselines, I don't have an answer to. I'm going to have to think about that, and particularly in light of some of the things we've heard today. There are some principles I think are really important, though. I think it's really important that we have a strong evidence base for what we do. I think it's really important that we show we, as individually, collectively, government, organisationally, don't benefit. I think that is a message that's missing at the moment. Because, in a sense, if you look at the other side, it's all about individual benefit, all about the individual acquisition of more money or more power. And that's not where we come from. So I think there's a sort of narrative, going back to the storytelling point, about we do this for future generations. We do not do it for ourselves. We're doing it to create a livable world for people that we love. And my book, I've used, Donella Meadows has been mentioned already. And she wrote, after the Limits to Growth, where she gave the evidence about how countries were overreaching their natural resources and thought governments would act, and this is back in the 1970s, and they didn't, even with her evidence. So she then wrote the 30-year update in the early 2000s, and she used 5 ways of describing what needed to happen. One was having a vision, and I think we have a vision, and then bridges can be a real part of making that happen. The second one is networking, or we might call it collaboration, that co-creation. You can't do this on your own. It has to be about turning a moment into a movement. The third one is truth-telling. And I don't think we do enough of truth-telling. We don't do enough of calling out those people who are lying about what is going to happen in their own interests. The fourth one is learning, and that is absolutely critical. Every productive organisation continues to learn. And the final one is back to my first point, it's loving. And I think loving is the thing that will take us through. And I fundamentally believe, particularly in the context of the majority world, we have to be loving towards each other across the world. And we also have to demonstrate leadership in the most surprising places, like a country with 3 million people and 10 million sheep, as you are in at the moment. And in terms of your lovely question about where I get my energy from, I get my energy from this. I get my energy from talking to thousands of people, mostly young, actually, across the world who find me and who want to talk about ways of creating a more positive future. I get my energy from agency, but I also get it from walking, from cycling, from sea swimming all year round. I get it from the land we run as organic smallholders. I get it from my family. And I get it from this perverse commitment I have to do this for as long as I'm able to do.
Thank you, Jane.